it's Jenny LSQ. Thanks so much for pressing play on episode 16 of LSQ, and I'm excited that this is the first part of a 2-episode special with one of my favorite artists of all time, and a dear friend of mine as well, singer-songwriter Conor Oberst, who over the years has released some of my favorite albums of the past couple decades, whether with Bright Eyes or Desaparecidos, or under his own name in more recent years. Conor is about to be on the road with the Mystic Valley Band, an amazing backing ensemble with whom he released a couple of albums a decade ago, so check ConorOberst.com for info on those upcoming dates. It's funny though, because you'll hear near the end of this first part of the interview, Conor talks about how he was going to take all of 2018 off from both the road and the studio, so that has not turned out to be the case. We recorded this earlier this year, I think it was probably in March, out in Los Angeles, and Conor and I have done a lot of interviews over the years, but we're also true pals, so it was nice to get together in an environment where we could have a conversation more like the ones we have when we're off the clock. Hope you'll listen to this entire episode and then make sure you're back here again next week for part 2 of it. We actually only get up until like the early days of Bright Eyes in this first part, so still plenty more to explore. Let's listen right now on LSQ.
I'm really going to try to be normal.
You can be normal. And don't feel like you need to be right up on the microphone. It's cool as well. Yeah, just feel this.
Lounge.
Thank you for doing the podcast.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. What do you remember as being your earliest moments of feeling music hit you in a way that was something special?
Gosh, I mean...
Like, what was the first stuff you remember listening to repeatedly on purpose? Like, finding a way that you could, whether it was by buying it or taping it off the radio or...
I would say, like, The Cure, R.E.M., all the stuff my oldest brother, Maddie, listened to. Like, I have two older brothers, and my oldest brother's like 6 years older than me, and... he lived in the attic, and I remember, like, my other brother, Justin, and I would, like, kind of, like, when he wasn't around, we'd, like, sneak up and get into his, like, tapes, basically. And, like, you know, we worshipped him and thought he was so cool, and, like, you know, it was, like, old enough that, like, his friends were, like, you know, they were already kind of starting to play music, and, you know, I guess when they were, like, junior high and, like, early high school... You know, it was the 80s, and it was like 120 minutes, like, ruled on, like, Sunday night.
And that's what they were into.
Totally.
Yeah.
And so, like, they would have, like, he would have his friends over, and I remember, like, they would watch it, like, in the living room downstairs. They were, like, allowed to, like, obviously, like, stay up later than we were.
Right.
And I remember, like, because it came on pretty late.
Yeah, it came on at midnight. Yeah. I would tape it on the VCR.
Right. And so I think in Nebraska, it came on, like, 10. Right. Which was still pretty late if you're like, you know, a fourth grader. But I do remember like trying to like sneak in, like watch as much as we could, and becoming aware of, you know, for growing up in Nebraska and being sort of, I don't know even where they were drawing a lot of their inspiration from, like him and his friends, but they were, you know, I'd consider them like pretty hip for... And, you know, and this is like Tim Kasher and McGinn. I mean, those were his friends, you know. So it was like that crew who turned into like Saddle Creek Records, but like that, they were all kind of in the same grade.
Right.
And I was a lot younger than them. But yeah, I guess they were.
So this is like 1988, 89
yeah.
kind of thing, yeah.
And so they were probably reading like, I don't know, what were you reading at the time?
Maximum Rock and Roll, maybe, or something like that.
And we did have this one really cool record store called the Antiquarium in town that I eventually started frequenting, and also became like a formative place of discovering music. But yeah, I think that was at least my first indication of like, you know, there's music that's not the music that's on the radio, or not the music that my parents listened to. And I really did like, well, we were talking a little earlier today about, you know, like Jackson Browne and, you know, whatever, Paul Simon, Joni, like the stuff that my parents listened to, which I do have like fond memories of, but that was definitely like, it's like, it was on the radio, or on the stereo, like Tom Petty, and my parents actually did have like good taste for what you could be into,
Right.
But I do think there was like, that was kind of like the first wave, and then the second wave I would say would be like Matty and all his friends, and kind of that like, like Replacements and R.E.M. and all that sort of stuff that felt like sort of special and weird, and like the kids at school didn't know about it, or whatever. And like, so that was like phase 2. And then when I got to be, I don't know, I guess like in junior high or whatever, and kind of like, and I can go to the record store by myself and start buying. I actually remember we used to go, there's a couple summers, like probably 6th, 7th grade, where we, like me and my cousin Ian and my brother Justin, like we would go to this pool every day, like all summer. Like we'd go there like when it opened, and we'd stay till like they made us go home, basically. And I remember, and I would like, this is probably when I'm like, I don't know, 11 or something.
Right.
And I'm like, I remember like I had this like, because I would want to wear like band t-shirts, but they were all way too like giant for me. So I was
welcome.
Like, I remember like wearing this like giant like Smith shirt, like walking around with like my like Laffy Taffies at the pool, just like thinking I was really cool.
That's so cute though.
And there was this totally, completely randomly, I didn't know this guy from any other part of life or wasn't friends with anyone, but he was a lifeguard there, and he came up to, I think me and Justin both had like some weird giant band shirts on, and he's like, cool man, you guys like, you like me, and he's like, oh, you should listen to Pavement. And it was like the first time I like ever heard like that it was a band,
right?
And he's like, yeah, like, and this was like, I mean, this is literally like when Slanted and Enchanted came out, like 92,
yeah.
And we were like, okay, cool. And that was also one of the first ones I remember, like, even separate from my oldest brother, that like the next time we got a chance to go to the record store, like, we gotta get that thing that that guy was talking about,
right?
And we like got it, and like we're like into it, so definitely like very like, I don't know, if being into like indie rock or punk rock or whatever is like a blessing, we were like very blessed. We got like
pointed in the right direction
really early, which like when I think back, I'm like, oh yeah, of course that's why my life went the way it did, because I had these like weird, and this guy Dave Sink that owned the record store, who turned me on to like a lot of older, he's like first person that you listen to Townes Van Zandt, or like, like
and you were still a kid then.
I wouldn't, by that time I was like in high school,
right?
But still, it was like, I was like 15, and like hipping me to like stuff that was pretty off the radar, as far as like definitely nothing you would have ever heard in Omaha. Like we didn't have any kind of cool radio station, or
right.
Were
you just at that point like a sponge for all of it, or did you? You pick up the Pavement record and you go home. Obviously, it's Pavement, it's awesome. Yeah. But was it just the intrigue of knowing what it was that was like at that point kind of, or do you feel like you already were starting to have taste in what kinds of things you liked?
No, definitely. I felt like I had. I mean, not that I was like, whatever. Discerning is a sort of just a weird word anyway, because it's like just people's taste. But like, I was attracted to things that had like melody and hooks and like words I liked. Because I mean, at the same time that, I probably heard like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a good example. I probably heard like Superchunk and like the Jesus Lizard around the same time, right. And I was like, I like Superchunk.
Right.
I don't like the Jesus Lizard.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Or like even like the really like atonal like Sonic-y stuff that like my brother Matty really loved, like the weird like kind of noisy.
Right.
And I just had to, I don't know, it was like really blended. I mean, I remember like one of the first shows I ever saw that really like impacted me in a live setting was they took me to Fugazi in '91 at Peony Park in Omaha.
Wow.
And I was just like, whoa. Like my little brain was blown wide open.
Yeah.
Because it was so loud and like so aggressive, but also like you could sing every word, and
yeah.
we like,
and well, just there's an intent. There is just, you watch old footage of Fugazi, and you can see the intensity, the intellectual intensity of it is just like palpable somehow.
Totally. Like, of course, I was like a little kid. I wasn't like politically aware enough to know a lot about like what they were singing about.
Right.
But
it felt important.
Totally.
Yeah.
And like it was like, you know, kind of distilled. That was, I mean, I think that's still what's so genius about that band is they, you know, in a, you know, obviously like in a similar way to like the Clash or something where like you're able to distill this maybe complex, more political idea or social criticism idea, but into this like pop song that is understandable, that you want to sing along to.
Yeah.
Even before you know what you're like singing along to.
Right.
You know, that's like the beautiful like subversion of like pop punk or like, you know, things that are just like catchy in that way because they, you know, you're already hooked on the sound and then
you're like find yourself singing "Why Can't I Walk Down the Street?"
Right.
So I mean, did you and Justin, did Matt know you were into his music? Would you ask him to like tell you more or for tips, or did it feel sort of like you guys had to do your own research?
I mean, you know, he was a very sweet older brother to us always, but you know, in the way any probably older brother is to like they're like like okay, I'll let you tag along this time, but you definitely like in the sort of, you know, position of like I'd like to know more, but I don't want to like come off as like not cool or you know, like be like, you know, like trying not to be like a tag along like little brat, but definitely like wanting, like thinking what all that stuff that was going on with like him and his friends were cool. And then of course, you know, they started bands in high school, so then going to their shows at a really young age, you know, like him and Tim Casher and Matt McGinn from Cursive, they were in a band when they were like freshmen in high school, like with my brother. And so like going to see their band and like thinking that it was the coolest thing ever.
And where would they play in Omaha?
I mean, they would play like, you know, high school
right.
dances and parties,
shit.
VFW halls, and like, I mean, there was a place called the Ranch Bowl, which was like a bowling alley spot that had shows, and there.
But you'd go to these shows. You were on the younger side of things going, and you get there, and where's there a whole scene? I mean, did you just sort of find that you could plug into like, okay, I don't need to ask Matt all the tips. There's kids there are kids out there who are into this shit too in Omaha. Totally.
Like we kind of grew into it, like me and Justin, like where we would, you know, we were definitely the young kids at first, but then, you know, by the time I was in high school, I was like fully going to shows all the time, you know, and playing, like started a band and started making like my cassette tape records, and I got obsessed with this dude Simon Joyner, who's a songwriter. Yeah. And that was a cool thing in Omaha too, because the art community in general and the music community, and definitely like the sort of like DIY music community, was so small that there wasn't a separation between like, okay, the hardcore punk bands play here, and the kind of like, you know, I mean, this is before there was even really like, I don't even think like indie was a thing yet, but it was like, and then there was like singer-songwriter stuff. Right. But in our town, like this singer-songwriter stuff was like pretty, like, it wasn't like coffee shop, you know, like if you listen to like early like Joyner records or like this guy Bill Hoover, or it was really cool for what it was. I mean, they were in more of the like 90s tape label culture of, you know, they were friends with like Vic Chestnut would come and like play. Our friend Alex like McManus, who played around at the same time, ended up like being in Vic's band for years, and you know, like those like early Smog stuff and like early Beck stuff, and like, you know, like early like Mountain Goats and like Shrimper and like that label, and like all that stuff was like somehow like present in our weird like Omaha, Nebraska town. I think mostly because of the Antiquarian, the record store, and Simon was already, people were already like getting, you know, famously like John Peel, you know, the famous DJ in England, like played like an entire Simon Joyner record, like start to finish on his show.
Oh wow!
In like '96 3 or 4 or whatever.
Damn.
You know, like he was getting like weird, and like, you know, Beck was in like Rolling Stone being like, I love Simon Jones. You know, like
right.
he was his own kind of thing that was happening, and so we kind of loved that, which was, you know, those early Joyner eventually had a lot of different. He's made a lot of records, but the early stuff was just, you know, acoustic guitar, vocal, 4-track, true like tape label, lo-fi world.
Yeah.
And that's like when my first records, I was trying to emulate that. You know, I mean, that was what I was.
That's
like,
the goal.
Yeah.
That's the goal at that point. But in terms of just like learning to play music, had you even before that, like, did your parents have music lessons as a thing that was one of the kind of activities that was recommended?
So my dad also was always a musician, and
okay.
Yeah, and so my first time I was ever on stage was with my dad. Had a band called the Manville Band, which was just a cover band.
Okay.
They played like, you know, they play like all the weddings and
they did like 70s tunes or something.
They would do like, you know, they would do the classic 60s, 70s like wedding, you know, catalog, but then they would also like, this is like in the 80s, and so they would learn like, the new like Hall & Oates song. And my dad was like, you know, he worked at Mutual of Omaha. He was just like a very like, we were like super just middle class, normal,
regular day job
like,
dad, yeah,
fully,
yeah.
And so like literally like the band was like, I mean, it was fun. Obviously, he liked to play music, but it was also like how he made extra money on the weekends,
right?
You know? And so they just kind of did whatever.
And wait, what did your dad play?
He was kind of like the utility guy. So he played he played
right.
guitar and keyboards and saxophone and sang harmonies and
damn,
like he did. Just kind of did all like whatever.
And so did he play music around the house? Like would he play music around the house just because he liked playing instruments, or?
Yeah, there was always, you know, we were lucky in that sense because, you know, the first records I made, he had this like TIAC like 1/4-inch 4-track, which now I'm like, oh, that was such a beautiful thing. At the time it was like kind of dumpy, but it was like, you know, this sweet 4-track machine, and he had like a little PA. So by the time my brother started playing with his friends, a lot of stuff would happen at our house because my dad had like...
And he had a guitar.
Had like an amp and guitars.
A guitar, right, yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, I remember trying to play, like, when I was like, first started playing guitar, I was like 10, like, you know, he had this beautiful like 1970 like Martin, like Dreadnought, which is like a big bodied guitar that like I think he got like when he graduated high school or something. But like I remember trying to get my hand over the top of it to play the strings, and it was like I couldn't even like reach it, you know. It was like, but yeah, he was cool. I mean, I never like had lessons or anything like that, but like yeah, my dad and Maddie just taught me like chords, and then I kind of started like hanging out with other friends that like, and like my first band when I was like 14, like. Tim Kasher from Cursor was in the band with me. He was obviously a lot older than me, so he taught me how to like. I mean, literally, I remember him like explaining to me like, "This is what a distortion pedal does." You know, step on it now. Like when the chorus comes, I was like, "Oh, that's how they get that to sound that way." You know, like on record,
it lives up to its name.
Yeah, and it's just like, so yeah. I was always and meeting Simon and. Starting to play like my first show, like little shows. I don't know. I was very much, you know, for better or worse, I was very much always like encouraged the whole time, you know, where people were like, it's great, keep doing it, you know, which I think is like why I made so much music so fast, because I didn't feel, you know, it just felt like that's what I should be doing. That's what all these... Even though most of them are a lot older than me, it's like, that's what my friends do. So we make records, quote unquote, right. You know, tapes or whatever.
And was this, at that point, Commander Venus yet, or? Yeah,
so my very first stuff was like under my own name, like just like cassette tape records. But like pretty much within a year or two of that first thing, my first record, quote unquote, then Tim and I And Tim basically offered to be, I like expressed wanting to like play my music louder in a band form. And he's like, I'll play bass for you. And so it was like me and him and this drummer, Matt Bowen, and then eventually this guy, Rob Nanzel, who still runs Saddle Creek Records. And we were just like, I don't even know what we were. We wanted to sound like Superchunk and Pavement and the Pixies and all of like our heroes. But we ended up making like a couple records and like signing to a label in New York. And like, the first time I like left Omaha to go on tour, I was like 15, like in the summer.
Damn.
And then the next year, like, we went to New York and like made a record when I was like 16. And, we were doing like South by and like CMJ and the label. I mean, they didn't give us a bunch of money, but the label like gave us money to like make a record, which is pretty crazy. Like, they were called Grass Records at first, and they did like Brainiac and like The Wrens and Sunbrain and Mouse. Oh, they put out a lot of cool records. And right when we signed to them, which is another funny story, which is this woman Camille who was signing me. This is like, we had made a record ourselves, and then we sent it out to like, our favorite labels, which was like Grass was one of them, because this band Mousetrap from Omaha had been on Grass, but like it was also, we sent it to like Sub Pop. And so we sent it to them, and it was actually after, I remember it was right after Valentine's Day, and we had self-released, like we had pressed up like, I don't know, like 300 CDs and like sold them locally. And then we're like, we should send them to the labels, like that we like. So me and Tim went to like, whatever, like CVS or like the equivalent,
right,
and bought all the heart-shaped boxes we could buy because they were really cheap right after Valentine's Day.
Okay.
With the candy. And then we put our CD in it, which having a CD at that time was like a big deal to us.
Right.
I was like, just CDs were still kind of expensive to me. And like we wrote like love letters to like our, like the labels we liked. Like, dear Sub Pop. Probably sent like, I don't know, 20 packages out. This is like, going to the post office, filling out the address. Like,
yeah, old school.
Who knows?
Yeah.
And this woman, Camille, at Grass, like, she opened it, listened to it, liked it, was convinced that I was a woman because my voice hadn't changed yet and I had this crazy high, like, screaming voice. Called my, like, landline at my parents' house, like, rang one day, and one of my brothers answered and was like, yeah, here. And I'm like, hello? And she's like, blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, my jaw hits the floor.
Oh, my God.
And she's like asking me. And then, like, I don't know, as our conversation unravels, she realizes that
you're a boy.
I'm like a 14-year-old boy, not like a 20-year-old girl. And I remember she, like, screamed. She's like, what? She's like this super New York lady. She's like, and she got even more excited. She's like, how old are you? And like, because you couldn't tell from our artwork. Or we didn't send like pictures of ourselves or anything,
Yeah.
And they signed us.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then it got weird though, right? Because that label turned into
Wind Up.
Right.
Yeah, which put out Creed famously.
Exactly.
And like,
and
what's that other one?
Evanescence and stuff like that. But I remember you telling me too about how like the guy who took it over who loved you but I remember you telling me how he played you like early Creed shit or something.
Yeah, totally. This guy Alan Meltzer and his wife bought Grass, which at the time had tons of bands and a lot of great bands. Like, I mean, I actually heard they're making a documentary about him, but like this band Brainiac, which is still like one of the most amazing bands.
Oh yeah.
The singer Timmy Taylor died young, so that's why people don't know about it, but it's so great. They were on Grass, and
Toadies were on Grass at the beginning.
Totally. David Dondero's first band, Sunbrain. Tons of great bands that we loved. The Wrens were still,
of course,
they're still our band. But he bought it all and essentially like dropped all the bands, like kind of right after we signed with them, and kind of like cleaned house. And I don't know what their vision. He had come from like a way different, like more like major label-y world. but yeah, he took a real shine to me, which took me a long time to figure out why. But and he was always, despite his musical endeavors, he was, and I think he was pretty cutthroat business wise. But he was always very cool to me. He's good. I'm speaking in past tense because he's gone now.
He's passed away now. Yeah.
Yeah, but he. Later on, I found out that he had a son. Him and his wife had a son that had died in like a car accident that was like similar age to when I was at the time, which was like 16, 17.
Right.
And he kind of like weirdly like just let us do whatever we wanted and like bought us a van and like bought us amps and like no one bought.
Is that why you recorded in New York?
Yeah.
Right.
So we went to this place, Water Music, like in New Jersey, and I mean they must have spent like kind of, a good chunk of change.
I mean, at that point, obviously you were a kid. You were coming from having a just sort of the big indie stuff at the time that had reached you was like your only kind of blueprint for what a band might really become realistically or whatever. But, you know, as a teenager in New York making a more expensive than necessary record potentially, like, did you already have any idea, like, okay, maybe I'll make music as my livelihood or something? Or did it just seem like a thing to do until you had to go back to school?
I was always, it was always my main focus, and like our group of friends, because at the time, even as we had the band and we're on that label, we were also self-releasing stuff of our friends, which basically became Saddle Creek Records, and everyone was kind of, you know, there was a minute where like Cursive was on a different label, and this band, Lullaby for the Working Class, which was Mike Mogus's first band, who Mike is in Bright Eyes with me, but they were signed to this label Bar None, and we're like doing, so like there was a minute where we all were like trying to make our own way on different labels, but we would always like release our own 7 inches or,
right,
you know, like our other friend, like we were building the label simultaneously as all this was happening.
Right.
So by the time, you know, come like late 90s, like 2000, you know, or I mean 98, 99, 2000, that's when like our other, I mean, none of us had really very good record deals on the outside. So by that point, we all realized like, oh, let's just come back and do this ourselves.
Right.
Which was like what we maybe the whole time knew we probably should do, but it didn't seem really possible when we started. It just seemed like, but by then we had learned enough. You know, we had seen record contracts and we had been on tours, and we knew, we kind of started to, like, our bullshit meter got like better.
Yeah.
And we're like, or we could just put our own music out, because most people you meet in this business are fucking jokesters. So like, that's, just do it, you know? And so that was really like the birth of like Saddle Creek. So by the time I started making like the Bright Eyes records and like those early Cursive records and like the shit that really sold a lot of records and enabled us to all kind of have our careers for, you know, till this day, really, was, I don't know, I feel like we were kind of like learning and like in the minor leagues, but like it was very like, I don't know, serendipitous that like we could write when we probably weren't, our music was ready to be like well enough produced and accessible. We had enough like business like acumen to like
get it out, to get it right, to not fuck up the like getting it to all the people who want it at the moment when they want it thing. Totally. And then, so when coming back from the Commander Venus experience, and in addition to deciding like, well, maybe what we've learned is that we should just put out our own records, but did you also, in starting Bright Eyes as the new project, have like, you know, sort of musical things that you knew right from the get-go were the things you wanted to do differently, as a break, you know, splintering off from Commander Venus? Like, no, this project will be a vehicle for something else. It was also simultaneous to, like, while Commander Venus was happening, I kept making basically like lo-fi 4-track home recordings of like, you know, my like acoustic songs that weren't, I didn't think were like rocking enough for like my band, so like they were a little more like sincere and whatever, you know. So I was
kind of amassing just, these like tapes of other songs that I didn't use for the band. And yeah, I guess it was like right around the time that when we really decided to be like, okay, now Saddle Creek's a real label and we're going to start doing stuff and we're going to, I don't know, we got like more organized. And it was actually like Rob and Ted Stevens, who's in Cursive and was the main songwriter in Lullaby for the Working Class, but they were both like, I had been giving them my tapes for like years, and they were like, this is like really good, like let's put this out, like, and I was like, I don't think it's good, but you guys, okay. And so they like took all my stuff and like compiled, they put like, of like, I don't know, the 70 songs I'd sent them, they put like 20 together. Like, we're gonna press a CD. So that was the first Bright Eyes record collection of songs,
right?
And that was kind of like, at the time I didn't even, it was like such a side project thing to me because I was like still focused on the band. But they put it out and it was like, okay, cool. And then stuff got weird with Grass and Alan, and which, to finish my Alan Meltzer story, just to give credit where credit is due. We were like, our band was breaking up, like Tim left to do Cursive, and yeah, I called him up and was like, and they must have signed me for, I don't even know how many records. I'm sure we signed like the worst record deal. 6
records or something, yeah.
And I was just like, Alan, like, man, it's like, I'm just not into this. Like, we got our own label and just want to do my own thing, man. Like, and he fully just like let me out of like the contract, like completely.
Oh, wow.
Like, which I think was like completely not his personality at all. But like I said, he had this weird like son thing with me, so he just was like, okay, you don't want to do anymore, legally let me out of everything. Which like to this day I'm like, God, my life would have been so different. Did he
leave all of his money to his chauffeur? Is that the thing too? Something like that?
I never heard that story.
Yeah, I think there's something. There's a lot of interesting ins and outs that I'm not remembering right now. Alan Meltzer is the name. If you guys at home,
he was very eccentric, and him and his wife were sweet. But like, I remember like when I turned 18, they like flew me and like my girlfriend out to New York, and like drove us around in limousines, and like we smoked weed, and they took me to like Blue Man Group and shit. And I still to this day, it's the fanciest apartment I've ever seen in New York. They live like on Park Avenue, like in this fucking gnarly spot. But
yeah.
I don't know.
So he let you out of the Commander Venus deal. I'm intrigued that you had 70 songs, but you didn't know if you thought they were any good, but you kept making them. You kept making and recording these songs. Yeah. I mean, did you just need to? Did you feel it? Like, what was the urge when you would sit down and play these? You have something you wanted to get off your chest, or you just hoped you would get better? You just thought, if I keep making them, I'll get better.
It was, and I actually, now I honestly like think, I wish I could get back to this point of like my mindset, but it was just purely a lifestyle. I mean, it was like literally what I lived and breathed every day.
Right.
Was writing songs.
Right.
For a long time of my life. I don't anymore. Like, I have to, like, put effort in to, like, want to write a song. But, like, when I was a kid, for probably the first, 25 years of my life, or, well, I guess I started writing songs when I was, like, 10, so for, like, for probably at least the first, like, 15 of those years of writing songs, it was just what you did every day. Did it by yourself, did it with your friends. It was just, it was the most, important thing in existence. So when you care that much about something, it doesn't feel like work or feel like anything. It just feels like, oh, that's what I do all the time. And I do wish I could get back to that. I don't know. I mean, it's not, my story's like not unique, I feel like, with songwriters, but like I feel like, so many things enter into it later on. And
so many questions. Because I feel like, in the years that we've known each other, there have been multiple intervals when you've had like maybe it was that the touring for an album had finished, and you'll say like, I don't know, maybe that's it. Maybe I'm not gonna make any more music or something, as if you're like genuinely don't know what's gonna happen. But then, inevitably you do. So what is the thing? What, do you just feel something shift when it's, now instead of it just being the thing you do every day, do you feel like, almost like I have to cough or something, here comes a song? Like, is that when you do pick up a guitar and think like, here I go, I'm gonna do this now? Or is it just a matter of forcing yourself?
I mean, probably a little bit of both. I mean, honestly, I've been struggling with this like lately, like where I'm just like, sometimes I feel, and this is also probably like, a guy like pushing 40 without really like a family or kids or like some other thing that like would maybe change your priorities or something. Mm-hmm. So I feel like a lot of times I feel like, and this is the first year also this year. What year are we in? 2018?
It's the big one.
Like that I have not, like, I'm like not really doing any shows this year. I have like no plans, recording. Like it's like the first year I've really like taken off in my adult life. So I've actually been struggling with this notion a lot. But I think what it comes down to for me is like, I don't know. And maybe I'll eventually find some other thing. But that process of like the writing of the song, the making something out of nothing, just that. I mean, that mm-hmm. birth, that creativity. I mean, that's like what it is.
Yeah,
is like the thing that still is the most fulfilling thing in my life. I just find it like harder and harder to like get to it,
Mm-hmm.
And so it takes more effort, it takes more like concerted effort, it takes more like, okay, I'm gonna like block out some time to like think about stuff and be away from the sort of rigmarole bullshit of the world,
distractions and shit.
Yeah, and like I'm gonna like focus on this thing that I know is still inside of me. It's not as accessible. I think when you're young and you're in that mode all the time, there's more of like a direct conduit to that part of your psyche or your soul or whatever. And maybe it's a little counterintuitive that you would feel like, I don't know, or I would think maybe having done something so many times for so many years, you become more self-assured and like you're like a craftsman and this is like I can do this and you put this brick here and it's like, but like to me it's like gotten less like, so I'm more, I don't know.
I think I actually disagree, because I was just thinking as you're saying that about a guy I know who is very skilled at solving a Rubik's Cube. Like he's got a collection of Rubik's Cubes of all the different kinds, with the ones that have many more sides, whatever, and he can figure out the algorithms of them and solve it very quickly. So with like not even looking at it.
I've seen him do that on YouTube.
And really fast. It's crazy. And ultimately, shouldn't something creative be the opposite of that? Like, shouldn't it be where you wouldn't want it, the better you get at it, the more you need to look at the cube while you're solving it, because the more perspective you have on like what is really good. And it's like harder and harder to make something good once you know what good is.
Yeah, and to kind of keep the mystery in it. I mean, even though it's frustrating, like every time I like finish an album or like finish a batch of like writing a batch of songs, because my stuff does like kind of come in waves. So it's like I'll like be like, wow, I have like 15 new songs. Like that feels great, But inevitably, like following that is like, I'll never write a song again.
Yeah,
like that was it. Like the sponge, I squeezed the last drop out. That's it. And I get, as frustrating as that is, it's maybe better that it's like that, because it does keep the mystery in there. What I'm saying is it would be horrible if it became like so formulaic. It was like, and now I sit down and write a new song. You know, like if it is like that little of a struggle, then I imagine I would just be writing terrible songs or just repeating myself like ad nauseum. But I don't know.
All right, well, that's where we actually took a break to stretch our legs and stuff. So that's, I figure, where we should wrap up part 1 of the 2-part Conor Oberst episode of the LSQ podcast. Part 2, episode 17, is coming out next week. And, there's still plenty more to get into, including Conor's evolving songwriting process following the early years of Bright Eyes, where we just sort of left off. If you're not already subscribed to LSQ, if you do that right now, go ahead and subscribe. You'll get that next episode and all those that follow automatically. Also, I'd love your feedback. You can always reach me on Twitter @JennyLSQ. And thanks again to Conor for being the best, and thanks to you for listening.